Hello and welcome to India's World. After negotiations lasting 2 years, Iran and the 6 world powers have agreed on the broad parameters of a nuclear deal. The final agreement is now to be worked out by June end. The deal permits Iran a limited nuclear enrichment capability, but subjects its nuclear program to an intrusive inspection regime. Iran in turn will get relief from global sanctions if it demonstrates compliance with the deal. Some of the highlights of the deal are: 1. That Natanz will be the only Iranian facility allowed to carry out uranium enrichment. 2. That the deeply buried Fordo enrichment site will be converted into a nuclear research facility. 3. That Iran would be allowed to continue uranium enrichment in limited amounts, but with all spent fuel to be shipped out of the country. 4. That the Arak heavy water reactor of Iran, which is still under construction, will be redesigned so that no plutonium is produced at this site. There will be no reprocessing and the spent fuel once again will be exported. And finally, that all 3 of these sites would come under heavy inspection of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. US President Barack Obama has claimed that the deal cuts off every pathway for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon and establishes the most intrusive inspection regime in history. If Iran cheats, he said, the world will know it. To discuss the contours and the implications of the nuclear deal between Iran and the P5+1 countries, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Kamal Sibal, a formidable diplomat. He is India's former foreign secretary and India's ambassador to Russia, France, Egypt and Turkey. We have with us Ambassador Rajiv Sikri, another distinguished diplomat who retired as secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. He's been India's ambassador to Kazakhstan. He has overseen India's relations with East Asia, ASEAN, the Pacific region, the Arab world, Israel, Iran and Central Asia. And we have with us Ambassador Shilkant Sharma, a former Secretary General of SAARC and India's ambassador to Austria. He's an expert on disarmament and has worked with the IAEA in Vienna. So I welcome all of you to this discussion. Ambassador Sibal, let me begin with you. What is the significance of the framework agreement with Iran? How important an achievement is it?
I think it's a major achievement, a major diplomatic breakthrough. Both sides need to be commended for the flexibility they have shown. And I must compliment the Iranian diplomacy, the depth and perseverance of their diplomacy in dealing with this extremely sensitive issue with the 6 of the world's major powers over such a long period of time, standing their ground on the essentials and yet having enough flexibility to make very important compromises on their part. From the United States side, I think there was a great reluctance in the case of President Obama to launch a military operation against Iran. And the only way he could resist pressures from the Congress and Israel not to launch a military operation was to achieve something during these negotiations. And I must say that he has, because of sanctions policy and the difficulties that the Iranian economy was facing, forced Iran to make the kind of compromises and yield on some of the issues which you have outlined, which are major compromises Iran has made. So Obama succeeded in that, and to that extent his diplomacy has been successful too. So all in all, I would say that it's a very good development, and we must compliment both sides for taking a very pragmatic, mature, forward-looking, flexible and compromising attitude on this extremely sensitive issue.
Ambassador Sikri, are the provisions of the nuclear deal between Iran and the P5+1 sufficient to ensure, as President Obama has claimed, that all pathways to a nuclear weapon have been closed in Iran?
I think so. I don't think that there was any doubt that any inspections regime or any agreement would leave any door open. And I don't think that the Iranians were really looking for a route to develop nuclear weapons, because with such scrutiny on them, it would have been quite impossible, and it would have been very foolish on their part to attempt to cut corners. In my view, the deal is not so much about the nuclear element as the fact that this has enabled Iran to have sanctions lifted and to come back as a regional player, a role it had been denied for 35 years. So to that extent, it's a huge development.
So are you saying they used the nuclear card purely for this purpose?
Absolutely. If you recall, in 2005, when the file was sent from the IAEA to the Security Council, I think the main objective was not so much the nuclear, but the desire of the United States to get the file under their direct control in the Security Council.
Which country would want to punish itself so that it can regain some regional prominence after a few years?
You mean Iran?
Yeah.
No, no, no. It is not a question of punishing itself. Iran cooperated with the United States at the time of the Iraq war and Afghanistan war. But then, because Saddam Hussein had been destroyed, Afghanistan was there, so the natural balance to Iran was gone. And Iran was dominating the region, which was not to American liking. The nuclear issue was a lever to persuade Iran to cut back on its regional expansion in Syria, in Hamas in Palestine. Now you see what is happening in Yemen.
We're going to discuss that.
So what I'm basically trying to suggest is that this was a negotiation as much about the nuclear, or maybe not so much about the nuclear, as about the terms on which Iran would be brought back into the regional power game.
Okay. Mr. Shilkant Sharma, do you think that the framework agreement satisfies the primary goal of P5+1, that the breakout time for building a bomb, if Iran indeed was trying to build a bomb, would be extended to 1 year? And why is it that in the framework agreement no time period has been specified, although earlier people said that it would be for a 10-year period? Do you think that 10-year period or whatever time period it is will be worked out in the final agreement, which will be finalized by June?
10-year is still going to be the the period during which these stringent measures by the IAEA monitoring and these controls which have been put, they will be in operation.
The joint statement doesn't specify any period as yet.
But the statements by Obama and the FAQ coming out from the White House, that mentions this.
Yes.
And naturally, they are actually worried about the brittleness of the compromise reached after 8 days of very hard negotiations. So you find a very delicate idiom which they are using. Like you find they're saying understandings or parameters, and they are still talking, and Obama says nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So that you should say that these things are going to come in the final version. But it has been quite evident, because over the last several months they have been talking about a 10-year period, 15-year period, and the Americans actually have said, Obama's statement, that actually the IAEA monitoring would go beyond a 20-year period. So that is the way they can guarantee.
So my question to you is that why are they saying that Iran would have to provide details of its past activities, present activities, and the American interpretation is that inspections could be anywhere in the country and IAEA could investigate suspicious sites or allegations of a covert enrichment facility anywhere in Iran. So does it mean that despite this framework agreement, suspicions continue and that Iran will have to prove by its behavior that it is adhering to this compromise?
Well, you see, for that you have to see this whole philosophy behind breakout. Breakout started coming when Iran agreed to join the additional protocol way back in 2003. So then they said, oh, that is not enough. What if you suddenly break out and go out? So we want to curb your capacity and your capability so that you can't break out and build a bomb. So that is the origin. That allows them a kind of an interminable, pressure for continuing to, no, that's not enough. You should do more. You should do more. And I think that was what had put Iranian radical like Ahmadinejad on the different course. They said, okay, you are putting pressure on us, so we'll walk out of the additional protocol, we start working on this track. So both sides actually have come back in this agreement, and they have come back closer to what was close in hand in 2003 itself.
Okay.
Now breakout, the problem is that you find Americans writing not only breakout, but creeping out and sneaking out, which means not only they might break out, they might continue to be in adherence, but slyly do it. Or they might continue to be in adherence, but slowly do it. So they want to block all these pathways.
Okay, all right. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with this interesting discussion in a bit. Welcome back. We're discussing the nuclear framework agreement between Iran and P5+1 countries. Sybil, you wanted to say something about breakout?
Yeah, very quickly. First, that Iranian program has been under inspections already. So it's not as if the rest of the world is not aware of what is happening on the ground in Iran. Number two, their concern is that if Iran produces enriched uranium to weapons grade level, how much time it will take and how much it needs to at least make one bomb. Their feeling is that if they are left without monitoring and all these restrictions, it could take them up to 3 months. So they want to extend this period to 1 year, during which they think then they'll be able to use diplomacy and military action if necessary to stop Iran from going nuclear. That's what they want, more time available to them to deal with this problem and not be suddenly confronted with an Iranian nuclear bomb.
Right. So what does Iran gain? Iran gains lifting of sanctions. On sanctions, the joint statement says the EU will terminate implementation of all nuclear-related economic and financial sanctions. The US will cease application of all nuclear-related secondary economic and financial sanctions simultaneously with IAEA verification of Iran's commitment. Now, before this, the UN sanctions will be lifted. My question to you is, will the process of lifting of sanctions between EU and the United States be different? Because EU could do it through a vote, but United States will have to do it through a presidential waiver. But presidential waiver is limited to 120 days. So are we going to see a series of back-to-back 120-day waivers by the president?
See, this is what I was asking myself, because this was one of the issues on which negotiations were stuck. Against the great concessions that Iran has made, they wanted an immediate lifting of sanctions. And Iran would be rightly worried the United States may step back from lifting sanctions because of congressional pressure, etc., etc. And therefore, they wanted a firm commitment. I am not sure the United States would be in a position to lift the sanctions as easily as is being made out, because one is the presidential sanctions, in the sense that an administrative decision by the White House, those can be lifted. But those sanctions which have been approved by the Congress, as you rightly said, the President can waive them. But it's only Congress that can lift those sanctions, and there is, as I see, there's no mood in the Congress to lift those sanctions. So this is going to be a contentious issue between Iran and the United States.
But Abbas Sikri, isn't this also going to be a contentious issue between President Obama and the Republicans? Do you think the Republicans can muster two-thirds majority needed to reject the presidential policy? And will President Obama then use his veto power to reject such a policy if it is adopted by the Congress?
I think once the UN sanctions are lifted and the EU sanctions will also be lifted, there will be pressure on the United States to follow. We can probably expect the President to use his waiver for a 120-day waiver. And I doubt if the Americans would want to be completely isolated. I see President Obama doing his utmost, using this full political authority and public opinion globally to ensure that the deal doesn't become unstuck.
Ambassador Shilkant Sharma, in 2 years' time, Obama will not be there. He can do whatever he wants to do now. What if there's a Republican president 2 years hence? Can he roll back the sanctions, even if Iran is in compliance with the deal? How difficult or how easy would it be, theoretically, for a Republican president to go back on lifting of these sanctions?
I think that's where the timing is of essence. Because by end of June, if they succeed, then Obama still has a length of time to go. Yeah. And he would ensure that Security Council action is taken about undoing all those resolutions which put sanctions on Iran. Yeah. And once those resolutions are agreed, then if you go back to the congressional resolution on sanctions, they were drawing upon the Security Council resolutions. Okay. Then EU also will be, as Ambassador Sikri said, EU will also be compelled to withdraw. So once these two things come into force, at that time, no matter who comes after Obama, it will be very difficult for that government to try and restore these sanctions.
Okay. Ambassador Sikri, you know Iran well. Do you think the sanctions relief gives President Hassan Rouhani of Iran a major domestic win? And would this translate into political reforms domestically?
Well, it gives him a political win, but whether it will translate into reforms, I'm not sure. Because that is his compact with the clerics, that on the one hand you remove the sanctions and that will enhance the legitimacy of the regime, so that there is no popular pressure for a change. Now the regime will say, look, you know, we got the sanctions lifted, so we're doing great. So I don't think that there's going to be any change for reform because of this issue. It is now that the expectations have been aroused, and if the sanctions are not lifted, that's when there's going to be a problem. If that's...
I'm sorry I interrupted you earlier.
No, I just wanted to make the point that Obama has also said that those sanctions imposed on Iran because of its involvement in terrorism and human rights violations and all that, those will continue.
Well, even the UN sanctions on missile technology will continue.
And missile technology will continue. So it's not as if all the sanctions would be limited, but the critical thing would be sale of oil and investment in Iran's hydrocarbon sector, in which we would be interested. Those would be the important things. But given the history of negotiations, one can keep one's fingers crossed. One hopes that between now and June everything will be smooth and thereafter.
Yes.
But you never know, because this whole business of inspections, intrusive inspection, and raising suspicions, trying to remove those suspicions.
But it's through agreed procedures.
No, but you know how it is. It's the American, like it happened in Iraq, it'll be the Americans who will be going into Iran in all sorts of places, this and that, creating tensions. It's going to be a complicated process.
Let's for a moment assume that such problems don't arise and sanctions are lifted. Then do you agree with Ambassador Sikri that even if Iranian economy starts doing well, and a lot of consumption needs or aspirational needs of the middle class in Iran are satisfied, that there would still be no domestic change, because the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei may still limit the pace of any domestic policy reform, saying that where have we gone wrong? In fact, it's because of our regime, our system, that we've been able to get the sanctions lifted, as he said.
It can play both ways. One is that at the moment, because of international pressure, they can easily mobilize the public opinion behind them to say that you are combating this great Satan, the United States of America, and therefore suppress freedoms and not give them sufficient space, which obviously a section of the public wants. On the other hand, if the situation gets increasingly normalized and some kind of a bilateral relationship starts with the United States, and they get the feeling that their regional role has been recognized as a result of this, and they get confidence that they'll be able to deal now with Syria and other issues because they have more money in their coffers, then yes, they can afford to be more liberal internally and give space for more reform. I personally would feel that the latter is likely to happen.
Ambassador Sharma, you wanted to say something before we went on the break.
Yes, I just wanted to add a small point to what Ambassador Sibal said. The Iranians are quite a smart lot, and they've been seeing the history of last 30 years. And if you see that filtering in the statements of Rouhani and Khamenei and Javad Zarif. Now, if you find the example of Gorbachev having gone for political liberalization and what Soviet Union encountered, since then all these big powers, big countries who have a big image of themselves are extremely cagey about political reform, and this political conservatism seems to be very high on their mind. So my take would be that Iranian regime would be a bit difficult to give political liberalization, because political conservatism seems to be their strong point.
So you're on the same page as Ambassador Sikri, but let me ask you, Ambassador Sikri, the big picture that you were talking about earlier, and I interrupted you at that time. Now, will the nuclear deal also change the relationship between Iran and US allies in the region, especially Saudi Arabia and Israel? How would they react? Israeli Prime Minister has already said that a deal that is based on this framework will threaten Israel's existence. Why do you think he has said that, when you would have expected a more nuanced statement when all pathways to nuclear weaponizations have been stopped?
Israel is not really worried about Iran's nuclear weapon, but they are afraid that they cannot handle Iran in the same way as they've been able to handle the Arabs. Number two, Iran carries much more credibility in the Arab street than the Arab dictators and sheikhs and so forth. So here is now a game being played for regional leadership. And there are many players. There's Egypt, there's Turkey, there's Israel, there's Saudi Arabia, there's Iran now. And Iran is a very substantial country, 75 million people, with extending from Pakistan up to Turkey, up to the Mediterranean almost. You can't ignore that. The Iranians realize it. And the Iranians have been quite open in saying that we don't need nuclear weapons. Our natural weight will enable us to play this role. Now you see what's happening in Yemen. If the Iranians are behind it, they have created an existential crisis for Saudi Arabia. Because if Yemen blows up, Saudi Arabia could crack up. So this will enable them to ensure that some pressure is let off on Assad in Syria and in Iraq. So this is now a complete change of the global balance. Obviously Saudi Arabia is worried because Traditionally, the compact has been between Saudi Arabia and the United States. Israel is worried because it will no longer be the hegemon. And the allies of the United States in the region, be it Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Israel, are wondering how far they can rely on the United States for their support.
Ambassador Sybil, on this question of balancing competing geostrategic interests in the region, can the U.S., after the deal, does it become easier for the U.S. to balance these geostrategic interests, or does it become more difficult, especially given the fact that Iranian proxies are fighting wars in Syria, in Iraq, and now even in Yemen?
Look, if you look at what was the discussion during all these years, the Iranians were saying that the United States is putting pressure on Iran on the nuclear question because of the Shia arc that has developed, because of its policies towards Hezbollah and towards Syria and Iraq. In other words, constrain Iran's regional role. Now, and the Iranians were saying that we are going to discuss only nuclear matters with the United States, that our regional role is not part of the bargain. So from an Iranian point of view, in fact, the nuclear deal gives them more space and would actually make them strategically more ambitious.
But from the U.S. point of view?
This is the problem, and this is where the problems will arise, because Iran's regional role, as was rightly said, has now become more of an established scenario. And in this situation, since Iranian support for Syria or for Hezbollah and all is not going to decline, on the contrary, with more money coming into their coffers, they will have more ability to support them financially and give them more arms and everything else.
Okay. Ambassador Sharma, if this is true, then my question to you is the U.S. developing an Iran-centric view of West Asia? And where does that, lead the region? And how does it impact India?
There is already a tacit underlying support to the U.S. mission in Iraq, fighting the ISIS. There are also allegations within the U.S. that Obama is going soft on Assad. He has actually, the Republicans and the right wing is accusing him that he might not actually be so hard on Assad. And so even talking with Assad, for instance, which was earlier not possible, is being mentioned. So that shows a certain, modus vivendi which is emerging between U.S. and...
How does it affect us? Does it affect us at all?
It will be good for us because we have unnecessarily been put against Iran over the last several years because of U.S. pressure. Now, Iran coming out of the cold will improve our economic relations with Iran, our oil purchase. Their coming out of the cold will reduce the oil prices, which will be good for us.
Okay, so we're running out of time. So quick answer from both of you. How should India view the possibility of Iran within an international nuclear regime, but at the same time an Israel which is doggedly outside the nuclear regime?
Well, Israel is outside the nuclear regime because the United States has been shielding Israel. If Netanyahu doesn't watch out and the American position on Israel changes, it's very unlikely, but if it does change, Israel is in real trouble.
How does it affect us?
I think that we have important relations with Israel, and those will continue. I don't see that that is going to affect. With Iran, as Sheil has pointed out, things certainly improve, and I think that from an Indian point of view, it is good that Iran will be playing a role because the security of the Gulf is extremely important with so many Indians there, oil coming from there. And without Iran playing a role, it's impossible to have.
All right, we're running out of time. Ambassador Sybil.
What's the question?
Same question. The question is, Iran, which is within the nuclear regime, and Israel, which is outside it, both in West Asia, how does it impact us?
Actually, so far as Iran being in and Israel being out, these are peripheral questions for us. If you ask me, I would say that if Iran was to develop a nuclear capability, it was no problem for us. We already have a huge problem in terms of a nuclearized neighborhood. So Iran is a problem for others, not for us. So that's an irrelevant question. But the question is of balancing our relations with Iran and Israel. And I don't think Israel expects us to give up our relationship with Iran in order to maintain our close ties with Israel or vice versa. And the fact that now there's easing of a situation between the United States and the Western powers and Iran, and the Iranian economy opening up, it gives us the opportunities to invest in the Iranian hydrocarbon sector and start purchasing oil at the same levels as we were doing earlier.
But
It's
a
very important for us.
clandestinely nuclear Israel now becomes much more important in West Asia, where everybody else has been
Not really. This is an established fact. The thing is, to my mind, Netanyahu saying that Iran is a big threat, existential threat. Israel itself is a nuclear weapon state. So what is their fear? Actually, what they are worried about is that under cover of a nuclear capabilities, just the same thing that Pakistan has done to us, Iran will encourage more terrorism against Israel, and Israel will not be able to brandish the nuclear threat against Iran. That's what their worry is.
Okay, all right. We've run out of time. I would like to thank all my guests, Ambassador Shilkant Sharma, Ambassador Rajiv Sikri, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, for participating in this discussion. Thank you very much indeed. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week as usual. Till then, goodbye, and thanks for watching India's World.